Hello everyone, I have just read chapter 7 of The Last of the Jedi, A Tangled Web. So not really a whole lot to talk about with this chapter, but Will and Amy dropped Solace, Ollie and Trevor off at at a kind of bank or cliff near the landing platform and hangar, and they watch it for a bit to see what places are going to be easier to get into, and Solace observes that if they get to the holding pen for the airspeeders, they can then go through the door to the hangar. And Trevor is a bit doubtful, because to him it looked like there were speeders going there every few minutes, but and Solace gives him one of her rare smiles and says, "You doubt me, don't you?" And Trevor goes, "Well, I never question you or Ferus." And Solace just goes, "Good philosophy." And she takes her utility belt and they kind of hike down from the cliff and they go behind the boulders, and I assume they get close to the pen because the pen's not really mentioned after that. But then they go into the hangar and they take a bit of cover, and there's lots of droids working the place. There's class 5 labour droids. There are... what are there? There are binary load lifters, which are basically with cargo. There are freight droids and there are battle droids which are handling security. And they're hiding behind a equipment loader at the moment. And Olion is just impressed, saying, "Oh, this is why they won. They're just so efficient." And Solace says, "Well, they do cut corners. They don't have a fire or they have antiquated docking systems, no fuel lines to the individual hangar bays," and Olion gazes up ahead and says, "No automated fire protection." And Solace just goes, "Why bother? They can afford to lose droids and stormtroopers." And Olion observes that they have to get to a data port. And Solace says, especially if they don't break in, but she could take a few droids out, but they need to be a bit sneaky here. And Trevor says that what they need is a diversion, and Trevor looks around and he sees that there are some droids working with a welding tool, fixing up some speeders. There is a battery droid, which is pretty much just a gonk droid, charging up some of the other labour droids, or no, freight droids, and there's also a barrel of fuel. And so Trevor then sneaks his way around, says it will only be 30 seconds, and he uses the ships and airspeeders for cover. He takes out one of his alpha charges. They got back in Dark Warning. I'm surprised they've lasted him this long. Because he's already used so many. Just how many does he have on him? But he then sets it for a low power, and he throws it, and it blows up, and it's able to blast a hole in the fuel line, in the fuel barrel. And the noise in the hangar it just makes the explosion drown out, and it forms a small stream that goes towards the sparking welding tool, and it lights it up, and it lights the fuel up, and it blows, and there's now a distraction. And so droids are, of course, wheeling over there, trying to get the fire under control. They're trying to get out of the way of the fire. And Solace and Olion make their way to the data port. And Olion's able to start getting some information. But as Trevor takes cover, a security droid is trying to get a fix on him, and Solo spots the droid as Trevor's reaching for an alpha charge, and she slices the droid in two, and their position is now they've drawn attention to themselves, and they have to make a mad dash, and Solace is, of course, very elegantly and effortlessly deflecting incoming blasts of fire. They get aboard the shuttle, they get aboard a small shuttle, and they make their escape. And they review what information they got, and Orion says that he didn't get enough, but and that the ship's location is coded, and they just didn't have enough time to break the code. But he did find something interesting, and that it was the ship is. The ship is what he says. The ship is the pet project of a senator named Sano Solo. There's a direct linkage between his office and the vehicle. And Solo says he's never heard of him, and she stays away from politics. And Orion explains that he's in the Emperor's inner circle, and that maybe Keats and Cullen can help them from their end. And Solo says she'll send the information. And there's a little moment between Orion and Trevor, and he says to him he's sorry he couldn't get more information. And Trevor looks around the cabin and says, no sweat, at least we got a nice ship. And Solo says that there's nothing more they can do at the moment, and that they have to play hide and seek with the Empire, and they'll have to see what Forbit, and they'll have to see what Cullen and Keats can come up with. And that's where we end off the chapter. This chapter was a bit difficult to follow. I think that's maybe my main criticism of this chapter. Chapter 7? Yeah, chapter 7. I think that is my main critique of this chapter. It was a bit difficult to follow, because it was one of those chapters where it could have been described a bit better, and you were a little bit lost on what was going on. It was this sort of says, like, we'll go to the holding pen, we can get into the hangar through the door there. But then the way it's described, they're going through boulders, then they see two stormtroopers and they go inside the hangar, and then they pretty much follow them through. And it's, okay? It doesn't seem like it's following the plan. And it's a bit like in Death on Naboo, when I was talking about when Ferus and Clive were escaping the Don Tamo prison, how the scene in the factory, that was quite difficult to follow because it just wasn't well described. You didn't have a good grasp of what was going on. And I think this was probably quite similar here. You just didn't have a good grasp of what was going on. It wasn't particularly well described. Of course, the essential information is there. The essential information is there to progress the story, which is the main part, and I guess that's the best thing. We know we got the consequence of going there, which finds out a bit more information, and we also find a little bit more about what Sano Solo's little trap might be. I assume he knows that Ferus is going to probably intentionally slow down his fixing of the book to give more time for Roan and Donor to be freed, because of course he can't trust the Empire. The Palpatine would likely manipulate him into fixing the book and have him killed anyway. That's just what Palpatine would do, or keep them alive and keep pressing Trevor to do more stuff for him, or else they get killed. And it's something that Palpatine would do, and I think Ferus knows that, and he's counting on Solace, Trevor and Orion to free them, and I think Sano Solo's able to kind of catch on to that in some capacity. Again, he probably doesn't know exactly what's going on, but he's able to catch on to the fact that Ferus has another plan going on. He knows that. And so, you know, I guess he's trying to set things up trying to set up every possible outcome. And it reminds me a little bit of Thrawn. A little bit. Not massively yet, but it does remind me a bit of Thrawn. And I think that's quite interesting. It's going to be interesting to see what Keats and Curran find. Hang on. Sorry about that. So, again, it's going to be interesting to see what Keats and Curran find. Especially Keats, because, again, he was a journalist before the rise of the Empire. And he probably has met Sano Solo for interviews. So, it's going to be interesting to see what he knows of Sano Solo and what he's able to find on him. Because I have a feeling, you know, he's probably going to be familiar with him. A couple of other things of note, I suppose, are Trevor and Solace. Again, I quite like that Solace, despite her still being quite serious, very well together, no nonsense kind of stature. It is nice to see her kind of break that when she smiles at Ferus, not at Ferus, at Trevor. And with Trevor's remark of, I never question what you or Ferus do. And you can see the two of them starting to warm up to each other now. And it is almost in the sense of, I suppose it's almost like Trevor, like Trevor's. In the last book, you know, it was said that from Ferus's perspective, you know, he was like the guardian that Trevor had adopted. He had adopted him as his guardian, and so it's almost like Ferus is his father, Solace is his mother now. No, that's not the case. But with how it's being portrayed, you know, it's almost as if that's the case, given he's seems to have adopted both of them as his guardians. Of course, when it comes to Solace, it was more of Ferus brought her on, and she's just so happens to kind of adopt herself as Trevor's guardian. Trevor chose Ferus, Solace chose herself for Trevor. So it is a quite interesting dynamic, and it is interesting to see how the two are very slowly warming up to each other, and yeah, it's going to be quite, again, it's going to be quite interesting to see how that dynamic with Solace develops. So yeah, because again, she is very slowly, and I do mean quite slowly, but she does have moments where she softens up a little bit, and it will be nice to see if she continues that kind of character journey of softening up a little bit. And I think one of the reasons she does feel like she's softening up is because we're learning more about her character. You know, we're spending more time with her. In Underworld, you know, she was such a big contrast to what we were expecting. And so when we did first meet her, she was very different from what we were expecting, and that kind of mystery, I guess, and subversion of expectation made her, I think, only excelled that serious, no-nonsense kind of thing she had going on, and a little bit of self-indulgence. But as this has kind of gone on, we've learned more about her character, and the more her character has developed, and the more we've spent time with her, the more we're kind of becoming a bit more sympathetic for her, and we're seeing those moments of her softening up. But much like Trevor, you know, she is still trying to uphold that more serious, no-nonsense facade. I guess not really a facade, but, you know, personality. And if anything, you know, it's... Whereas Trevor's trying to suppress all that pain and is doing a good job of it, but, you know, he often lets it slip out. Solus has pretty much successfully suppressed that softer side to her, but you're starting to slowly see it break back through. It's quite an interesting thing. Again, Olian. For some reason, I really like Olian, which is funny because there isn't a whole lot to him, really. But I do very much like Olian. And again, I keep thinking of him speaking like this. For some reason, whenever I read his lines, I always think of him talking like this. With that kind of accent. For some reason, you know, it just really works for Olian, in my opinion. But anyway, I don't really have much else to say, really. I think I've really said all I wanted to say, so, yeah. Looking forward to what the next chapter will be. I haven't actually read any text on that, so I have no idea what's gonna go in there, because sometimes I'll occasionally read the first initial lines or some random words in the initial lines to get an idea of who read what's going on in the chapter I didn't hear, so I don't know what the next chapter is going to be like or what it will be. So yeah, but anyway, thank you all for watching, and goodbye. Hello everyone, I've just read chapter 8 of The Last of the Jedi, A Tangled Web. So, Dex has indexed his eyes out in, of course, the Orange District. Dex has kind of left Cohen and Keats to their file searching, because, again, he's getting fed up with their bickering. And we learn that they've gone through many files, but they just haven't been able to find really anything that connects. And Keats isn't really too keen when it comes to all the information. It just feels like he's wasting his time, because there's so much information to consume, but none of it is connecting. And they eventually get the call from Solus, and Cohen starts berating Keats, saying that they almost missed that call. They almost missed the communication because Keats had almost lost the comm link, and Keats said, well, he found it. And Cohen says, after a search, and you lost it under that pile. And he goes, true, but I found it again. You never give me enough credit. You want the rest of my muffin? I don't want the rest of your muffin. I want you to be responsible. I keep telling you, don't say that word while I'm in the room. What do they say? Keats has always been an absolute joy to read. And Cohen says that they couldn't locate the true justice, but they found out that Sonosoro is involved. And Keats goes, oh, that is interesting, because Bog Davinian is a protege of Solo, and he wonders if they is it literally as it says in the book, because I know I probably will get berated for saying this if I'm not quoting it, but because of one of the lines, because one of the words used in here, which has become very common slang in recent times, and Keats says, that is interesting, it's our Bog Davinian link. He's a protege of Solos. Do you think they're cooking up something on Somalia? So, again, I had to quote that because I know I was probably going to get berated if I some people, and Cohen agrees that there is probably something going on, and if they can figure out what it is, they can help Ferus get some crucial information and help Solus and Olian as well. And Keats says, I knew there was a reason I was going through these senatorial records, and he knows that every time Davinian makes some sort of move, Solo's behind it. And again, Cohen says that's when Solo picked him out of obscurity and brought him into the government again. he's wondering why, because he's just nothing more than a hack. And Keats explains that it's a common thing for Sorbo. He picks people who are wealthy but done nothing with that wealth, and makes them their his protege, and they pretty much become. Hold on, I need to find the words because I know the words I need to look for, but I can't remember it. I can't find the words, so let's just go with messenger, which isn't an accurate word, but you know, it's Sordo's pretty much uses his proteges pretty much as like his own presence on another world. I was trying to find the word in the Darth Plagueis novel, but if I was to do that, it would take me literally forever to find it. So, so yeah, and I want to continue the review here before I forget what happened. But anyway, you know, Keats explains that he uses proteges pretty much to have his presence be on the planet and also make them feel like they're actually doing something, which they aren't. They're just doing what he's telling them to. But and it pretty much allows him to have control over some of the more important core worlds, because of course, you know, he's controlling the advisors he chooses, and that allows him to keep control over the worlds. And Keats says he's personally handpicked Imperial advisors to at least 10 planets in the core that I know about. And Curran asks how it ties to Somalia, and Keats says that he doesn't yet, but it's brilliant because he's been able to ingratiate himself into Palpatine's inner circle, and that he's and it says now his power. Now he's consolidating his power outside of it. I bet he's going to bat heads, or should I say helmet, with Vader eventually. And Dexter pops his head in and asks how it's going, and Keats figures out that Sordo's grand plan is, of course, to butt heads with not only Vader but also Palpatine, I assume, eventually, and take over the galaxy. And Dex goes, good, finding them is the first step. When he says Keats informs him that Rowan and Doan are on the True Justice, which is a travelling courtroom ship for political prisoners, and he tells him that Sano Sorlo is handpicking Imperial advisors and sending them to strategic worlds in the core. And Dex says that it's good, and they're finding their first steps, and Dex is quite pleased. It's actually quite, impressed by all servants of the genius of having the True Justice and trying them there, because then Sano can get information for resistance movements. And Keats says that Sano is a special advisor in the new academy where they train pilots and officers, and he's got his finger in what he refers to as a lot of nasty Imperial pies. And Curran says that in another few years he's going to have planetary rulers and officers loyal to him, as well as senators he has in what Curran refers to as his pocket. And Keats wonders whether Palpatine knows what he's doing, and Dex says he might know and not care, and that you can always just send Vader to get rid of him. And Keats says that they know he's in constant communication with the True Justice, and so they can at least give Solace and Olian and Trevor the location of it. And Dex is completely baffled. And he says, you already broke into the senatorial complex, but you're talking about breaking into the senator's office. And he says, Zachary is still in charge of security. Zachary, my old friend, Keats said. We had many a tussle when I was a reporter. I got thrown out of the Senate building by him more times than I can count. And I found Keats is very funny in this story. I think Keats might be my 4th or 5th favourite Star Wars character. He's just so funny. And again, I can't help but imagine him with this kind of voice. It's just too perfect for him. And Dex says that Zachary's nothing to laugh at, and he's only got a meaner now with the more power that's come. And he says it's a dangerous game, and Keats says it's the only way to play, and that's where we end it off. Again, we kind of knew this doesn't really tell us anything new, really. It very much just is a chapter to have our characters figure out what's going on, rather than telling us something new, really. As far as it comes to new information, it's been a bit, at least personally, because I don't know if this has been brought up in Jedi Quest or Jedi Apprentice, because I know Sano appears in those, but Sano has quite a lot of proteges that he brings under his wing, so he can use them as his I have to find that word. Can't find the word, but if I remember what I was talking about, Zoro keeps manipulating vulnerable, wealthy people who haven't really used their wealth for anything, and then putting them into a position of power so they can use their wealth and influence with that wealth, and manipulating them so he can further his own ends. And if there is one criticism I have with that, it just feels like a slightly different version of what we were going of Malorum in the last book. It just feels like we're repeating what was done with Malorum in the last book, but just swapping it out with an Inquisitor who is using its secrets and information and its intelligence with just someone who has a lot of control, and again also intelligence, but someone who has a lot of control in the Empire, and it just feels a bit repetitive. I think the great thing about Malorum is that we were really just kept in the dark as to what he was really up to, what his main goals were, up until pretty much the start of Death on Naboo. In the first 3 books, we knew Malorum was researching the death of Padme, but we didn't really know a whole lot of why. And aside from he was doing it for Vader at some point, and then we learn a little bit of contradictory information, which I assume Malorum's smart. He probably would have manipulated his way into doing it for Vader, but it just feels a bit repetitive to have another new villain who's pretty much just filling in the same place for Malorum. At that point, it just feels like, why not just have Malorum in there? But yeah, it's a bit disappointing, but it is also going to be interesting to see what the new spin is. But again, I just can't help but feel a little bit disappointed that it just feels like it's going to be the same thing over again, with Malorum wanting to get to Vader's position and then hopefully become Emperor himself someday. It's the same thing with Sano Sorbo. He wants to be the Emperor's second in command, and then while it seems like, if Keats is correct, he wants to become Emperor someday. It's again just a bit repetitive. It's a little bit repetitive, and it really does make you wish maybe it wasn't as repetitive. It makes you wish that maybe Sano was had a bit more of a bit of a different villain to Malorum. Or even have Palpatine or Vader be one of the more main villains. But again, it is what it is. And I do like how there is some differences. I do like that he's a political figure rather than an Inquisitor. Again, the entire reason I began reading Last of the Jedi was for the Inquisitors. I want to make that very clear. And I'm already 2 Inquisitors down, with Malorum and Sancor, and I have to read until about the 3rd to last to meet the last Inquisitor, Hydra. And then the 4th to last to finally get the first mention of Hydra. Well, I personally like to think Hydra is already in the books in Underworld, because there was a mention of Malorum having a personal assistant he was speaking to just before Vader arrived, and it's not identified who the assistant is, but I like to think it's Hydra. Anyway, again, it's going to be interesting to see. I know Keats winds up getting interrogated by Sano Solo, because I kept checking his Wikipedia page, and the first quote on the top on there was described him in an interrogation with Sano, and it was, got spoiled. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what goes on. And again, I am predicting Sano's behind the whole thing. Behind the whole bug, you know. It, from what it sounds like, with what Sano is, from what it sounds like what Sano is, it just does seem a bit like, it surely has to be behind it, you know. That's what it feels like, because of just the kind of character he is, you know. He's wanting to gain favour with the Emperor, he's wanting to take Vader's position, he's wanting to do stuff that pleases the Emperor and increases his favour with him, which again, very much like Malorum there. And I think that is maybe my main critique so far. I know we have barely gotten any Sano Solo in this, but yeah. Hopefully, you know, once, I guess, if Sano is taken out of the picture at some point, I was about to say hopefully, but I assume there's going to be like 3-4 book arcs, because I'm fairly sure Return to the Dark Side continues the Somalia arc. I could be wrong on that, but you know, it's if that does continue, it's, I do hope maybe we swap the arcs out eventually at some point. Again, with Solo, it just feel a bit too familiar with Malorum, especially given Malorum was only a book ago, really, less than a book ago. Really, you know, he was in the last book at the very end, and he lasted to the very end, and we were introduced to him just over a quarter of the way through this book, and so yeah. But on the simpler sides, I do very much enjoy a lot of Keats. I like that we got a bit more Keats in here again. Keats really, definitely one of my favourite Star Wars characters. He's very quickly become one of them. He's just so comedic, and I think that's the great thing about Last of the Jedi. They have such great comedy in there. They are serious stories, but they are also very comedic and very funny. And Keats is one of those characters who can very easily go from serious to humorous, just like that, and it always works, and always just feels so right for his character, and it's always so funny. And I do like how even Dex was getting fed up with Corrin and Keats' bickering, which, you know, I'm not too familiar with Dex's character, but it did make me laugh, and it did feel like, oh, even Dex is getting fed up with their bickering, and it did make that made me laugh. But you know, Keats, you know, this chapter just keeps on reasserting that Keats is not the kind of character you would just want to be around. He's just so it's just so funny, and also so warm and friendly as well. So yeah. And again, I am so happy he was not dead, because again, I was absolutely shattered at the end of Underworld when I thought he was dead, and I was so happy to learn he was still alive and going in Death on the Boo. So I am so happy he's still going, and so happy he is fine now. Now. But yeah. I haven't got really anything else to say on this chapter, I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see how they get into the Senate. I know because again, they did break in to get the information from Ferus, and I actually did have to think for a moment as to, wait, they broke in already when they first appeared in Last of the Jedi, so, okay, it was in chapter 2, what I remember now. You know, I had to think for a moment to figure out when they last broke in, because again, Curran and Keats, I'm fairly sure they very first appear in these books. Not Curran, actually, just Keats. And so it did make me think of, okay, since when do they last break in? And it was, okay, chapter 2 of this book, I forgot. But, yeah, it's going to be interesting to see just how they break in again. And of course, I got spoiled. They're going to be captured by Sano Solo. But yeah, again, it's going to be awesome. What is the next chapter going to be focusing on? Okay, we're going back to Ferus. Next chapter. Ferus and Clive, because we will assume we just saw Saf, which makes me think Ferus and Clive. But anyway, I don't really have much else to say, really. Haven't got anything else to say. So, thank you all for watching, and goodbye. Hello, I have just read Chapter 9 of The Last of the Jedi, A Tangled Web. So, we get to learn quite a little bit about Saf, like how the Saf society usually functions. But anyway, Ferus is intending to, we learn that whenever anyone's intending to leave Saf, they have to register their address. And so Ferus and Clive have gone to, of course, the 107th district or something like that, or the 100th district, whatever it was. The 107th district, there we go. And Clive is saying, so you think this Quintus is here? And Ferus says that no, he doesn't think he's there, but given how quick the order must have been made, it's probably where the previous owner for the Star Cruiser is. And maybe they know something that they don't. And Clive just says, you have a real eye for detail, it must have made you quite popular. And Ferus is very much saying no, on the contrary. But eventually they come to the apartment, and they start speaking over the they are able to start speaking to the person. We don't learn the person's name aside from a very rude woman, and she's absolutely hilarious, but also very rude. And we learn that she didn't meet Quintus in person, because that's how it works, how things go on Saf. You typically don't need to meet people in person. You can call each other and set things in place for them if they were intending to do a transaction. All she cared about was some money, and she said that she bought the Star Cruiser for some romantic travel before her boyfriend took off. And there was a line that really caught me off guard, and she said, before my boyfriend took off, the dinko. And that made me burst out laughing, because what's a dinko? And I googled it, it's a species in Star Wars. But it completely caught me off guard. And hold on. Again, she doesn't really learn. She doesn't really know a whole lot. But oh, gone too far back. But again, it doesn't know Quintus, but she set up an electronic advert, and of course Quintus got in contact. They did the transaction, and when Ferus asks if they ever, and she also says, well, who would want to travel the galaxy now with stormtroopers everywhere? But anyway, she then says that when Ferus asks if they ever met, well, spoke directly to Quintus. She said once, because she accidentally parked it in the wrong parking spot because her neighbours parked in her spot, and Quintus wanted to know whether he was being cheated out on something. And that's when Ferus thinks of an idea and asks if Quintus is male, and she says that he had a deep voice but it sounded electronically altered. And she didn't really care because at the end of the day she was just cared about getting credits into her accounts, which, for the people of Saf, fair. But they know they wasn't getting much else out of and Clive tries to work his charm and ask if she and says, I can see you pay attention to things. Did Quintus mention where he was going? And the woman just says, why would he do that? And why would she care? And Clive asks how long range her ship was, and she says that there was no hyperdrive, but it went fast because she likes to go fast. And Ferus and Clive start to leave, but the woman then tells them that the call came from the Fountain Towers complex, and Ferus is very sceptical because as she explains, the addresses are blocked. But she said that that the Fountain Towers district, they have a clock there, which is known as the chords clock, and and every half an hour it plays the first 3 chords of the Saf anthem, and she heard the chords when they were on the call, and that's so. They then head down, and as they also go into the turbo lift, you have Clive said, was it just me, or is that the rudest woman in the galaxy? And she says, you're not, and Ferus says, you're not crazy. No, it's not the Saf anthem, it's the Somalian anthem, sorry. And Ferus says that, and Clive says that if the Fountain Towers place is like any other place in Saf, it's going to have hundreds of apartments, but Ferus says it may also have an adjoining hangar, and they can find the Star Cruiser there. And once they get down to the lobby, they start leaving, and Ferus senses that they're being followed, and he starts checking his boots, and he looks at them, he slides his foot across the floor, and he feels the clicking, or hears the clicking. He hears clicking, and he hears a sensor tag, and notices it's on the sole of his boot, and so they walk out into the street, and they see a very wild chromium speeder flying up ahead. So Ferus jumps up and throws the sensor tag onto the speeder as it passes, leaps out, and Clive says, oh, you've got to be showing off. And anyway, then they make their way over to the Fountain Towers district, and we're told that there are 4 towers, and 3 of them and they each got adjoining hangars, and one is half built, and the hangar to that half built one is pretty much just got the framing there. And we learn that the hangars are about 200 stories or so tall. What was it? Hangars contains open air landing platforms every 20 stories. There we go. So they're almost, and we're told they're almost as tall. So and they start searching, and they eventually find the cruiser on what anger? What was it? What anger? On level 58, and they eventually find the Star Cruiser there. And Ferus says for Clive to look in there, and Clive goes, "Wow, a dashboard," or something like that, or a control panel. And Ferus says, "No, the seat." And Clive looks again and goes, "Hold on, what was it? A laser lasso." And Ferus goes, "A toy." And he's unnerved by the fact that there's a child involved in this, and he just starts to get a very bad feeling. He's had a bad feeling since he was on Saf, since he got here. And he knows he's being manipulated, but he doesn't know why. And Ferus knows he has a pretty good idea of his skills. He knows there are definitely other people out there who can help in this situation. Ferus knows that this is the ship, and he says that he feels it, and that there's some mud covering the registration numbers. And we're given a few last lines to finish off the chapter, which is, Ferus gazed at the apartment tower, thinking. We're told that he knows that Solace will contact him once Throne and Donor are rescued, and that he has to keep going and find the saboteur, but whether he hands the saboteur to the Empire or not is another question, and that's one he hopes he wouldn't have to answer. And that's where we end off the chapter. I like how we got a bit more of introduction to Somalian and Saf society here. And a bit more of like how it typically works. We learned quite a bit from the Rude Woman. I may just refer to her as Rude Woman. So, that just reminds me of a character in one of the Shooting Atma Doctor Who episodes, who was only ever credited as Kind Woman, and she was in Empire of Death. But anyway, we learned quite a bit about Saf and Somalian society from the Rude Woman. And the Rude Woman's an absolute joy to read as well. She's so rude, and at the same time she's so funny. It really do make me laugh. And she's described as wearing a shimmer silk dressing gown as well, which only makes the interaction even funnier. But again, I quite like the kind of culture stuff that we learned from her, and I also quite enjoy how I guess you could say the Rude Woman's kind of detective work on figuring out that he was in the Fountain Towers. How he's in the Fountain Towers. Because just from the noise of the chords, which is actually that's like a small detail you probably wouldn't take note of, and I'm surprised that as a character, that she remembered it. At least thinking realistically, but it's a story, so character-wise it makes sense. But I'm going to be interested to see where this leads to and who this Quintus really is, because again I keep thinking it's Sano Solo, but if a child is involved, I wonder what that would mean. I wonder if it isn't Sano Solo now. It's very interesting. Right? This is a very twisty and turny book at the moment. So, yeah. Again, Clive's quite funny, trying to be all charming and stuff, and it almost never works, from what we've seen. He tries to be charming, and it just never works. It always winds up backfiring on him. It happened with Solace, which was quite a funny scene in Death on the Poo. It's happened with this woman now. And she's telling him, "Get your hands off my door!" You know, when she explains about Fountain Tower, when she tells him about the hyperdrive or Fountain Towers, he says, "I could kiss you," and the woman just goes, "Not tempting." So Clive is again quite funny. Oh, I'm actually over halfway through the book. No way. No, apparently I'm over halfway. Looking at how many pages there are. It's because on the left that seems to be a little bit thicker than the right, so I'm surprised at that, because it doesn't feel like I've actually made much progress through the book at all yet. I'm over halfway. I'm on page 73 now, so page 73 will be the next one. But yeah, I quite enjoyed the little bits in this chapter, and I also quite enjoyed how Ferus is quite observant and he's very quickly able to pick up on details that just wouldn't immediately click. It didn't at least for me, it didn't immediately click. You know, with him figuring out that about the registration stuff. And, you know, I even mentioned earlier Clive saying, "I never realised what a mind for details you had, Ferus. It's an old skill. Must have made you popular. It made me a bore." But yeah, I'm gonna be very interested to see what the next chapter is. Okay, it's about Keats. I just saw Keats' name mentioned, so I assume this is going to be into the Senate. So, yeah. I have the feeling the next chapter may just end with Keats and Curran getting caught by Sano Sordo. Because again, I know Keats gets captured, I spoiled myself on it. It really frustrated me, that. But again, I'm happy Keats is alive at the moment. I know he'll probably die at some point, because I know there are quite a few characters in these books that die. In, I think, Reckoning on the Jedi asteroids, because I got spoiled as well. Hopefully Keats doesn't die sooner, because again that's going to be absolutely devastating for me if he does die. I know Trevor doesn't die in these books, and I know Ferus doesn't, but anyone else I do not know. But anyway, I'm just rambling on at this point, so I may as well just end it here. Thank you all for watching, and goodbye. Hello everyone, I have just read chapter 10 of The Last of the Jedi, A Tangled Web. So, Keats and Curran have broken into the Senate again. And they break into Sano Sordo's office with a little nifty device that Dex gave them, and it breaks the code immediately. Keats says, this, I wish I had these when I used to live back in my apartment. It would have come in handy a few times." And Curran asks, why? And Keats says, "Well, it's a little thing the landlord used to say, failure to pay the rent. Some landlords can be so touchy." Or something like that, along the lines of that. And they observe and Curran runs over to the desk and starts to try and find the data port, and Curran kind of observes the dark office compared to the fairly bright Senate. And it's late at night, yet it's still not fully stripped down. And Keats observes the lightsaber, so he doesn't recognise it, but he observes the lightsaber, sees it's a crack down the middle of it. And when Curran asks what it is, he says it's a lightsaber and that Sano keeps it in here because of how much he hates the Jedi, and it reminds him of them. And again, it reminds him of how they're now gone and how much that pleases him. Eventually Curran makes his way into the files, and Keats has a look through them, and he's able to break the code and get in there. And he sees that there was a memo that he sent to Palpatine, and that he kind of skims through it and says that, and in there he says that there's, let me see the things of notes. A memo Sarlo sent to Palpatine. Blah blah blah, Your Excellency, Your Imperialness, the usual. But here, he promises results on Somalia. Personally responsible for results, he says. More drivel. And wait, here. He says, and there will be news of a deep interest of yours that has long coincided with mine. What can that mean? That's what Keats has said here as he's reading through the files. And Cohen says he doesn't know, but they should concentrate on the true justice. And Keats is able to find schematics and a complete record of it. And Cohen says that they're going to need the ship's logs for coordinates. And Keats says that it's not a problem and they'll find it. And that's when Cohen realises he's tripped something, the booby trap. This is what the trap was. And he explains that it's a security code. And there's a shimmer on the indicator light. And he says that some data port models display that. And that's if it has been booby trapped. And it's supposed to be a silent alarm. But if you know where to look, and they both realise they're going to get caught. And they're okay with that, because this information is vital, and they would have played their parts if they get the information out. And if they were caught, as it says, so be it. And so Keats flips through the file, and he starts downloading, making a copy of it, because if he sends it from Solo's computer, they'll be able to locate Solus. And he's able to pull it onto his, I assume, comlink. And that's when the Senate security pours in with Imperial guards led by Zachary. The one, as he's described, Imperial guards led by one short, burly human man. Well, hey there, Zachary. Long time no Keats. The man pointed to Blaster. Breaking into a senator's office again, are you? Keeps them honest. Keats is so funny. And he's frantically transmitting the information to Solus behind his back. He's keying in the comlink access and he sends it, and Zachary says, I'm going to enjoy handing you over to the Empire. And Keats says, anything that makes you happy. And he looks at Cohen, and his command tells him that he's sent the coordinates, and that it's fine if they're captured now. It doesn't matter, because as it says, they'd won this round, and that's where we end it off. It's gonna be interesting to see what Sano Sola is up to. Again, this book is really getting deeper and deeper. It's like watching an episode of High Potential. If you haven't watched High Potential, it's a very good series, but it's constantly unravelling new things throughout the episode, and it always keeps you guessing for the most part. And this book is really doing the exact same thing. It's keeping you guessing. At first I thought the Saboteur may have been anyone. Then I thought it may have been Bogdavian or the Empire or Palpatine. Then I thought it was Sano Solo. Then I thought it was someone else. Now I'm kind of suspecting Sano Solo again. And I do not know who the Saboteur is. So it's going to be interesting to see what Sano's plan is, what the interest on Somalia that will coincide with Palpatine's, because what was it again? And there will be news of a deep interest of yours that's long coincided with mine. Okay, so again, it's going to be interesting to see what that news of any deep interest is. Again, this chapter, Keats is back on full force. Again, Keats is so funny, so good, and that's the one thing about these books that are so good. They are so funny. But they're also very serious as well, and the humour never feels forced. It doesn't feel forced, and they're just so funny. It's just it's so funny. Keats especially, dare I say, is my fourth favourite Star Wars character. I think he's a lot fun. I think he's a bit funnier than Trevor. I think I'm gonna say that. I think he's a bit funnier than Trevor, which I think puts him a bit higher than him for me. I think at the moment my list from best to worst of my top 5. Again, none of them are bad, but top spot Greyer, then Darth Plagueis, then Ferus, then Keats, then Trevor. Sorry. So yeah, I think Keats. Keats is just so funny. I'm really happy. Again, I keep saying this, but I'm really happy he's not dead. I'm so happy. I know the next chapter's going to focus on Solus, Trevor, and Orion, because I saw Orion get mentioned when I flipped over the page. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how they get onto the True Justice, what they do from there. So yeah. What else can I say about this chapter? Again, Keats funny. I like Cohen's interactions with Keats. You know, Keats is the kind of guy that he takes his stuff seriously, but he also enjoys a joke, whereas Cohen is more about just taking it completely seriously. And so whenever Keats is somewhat messing about, Cohen is a bit disapproving. But you know, they're still friends and such, and it's absolutely funny to watch them too. So yeah. You know, you got the one line of, Keats even says that he's learned more about what a senator is like from their office rather than their files, and again, that's quite interesting and he does remind you that he was an investigative reporter. So yeah, and from what I remember, he was one of the first reporters to question Palpatine. I can't remember what it was though. Let me check. Keats Freely. There we go. Good old Keats. Yeah, grabbing all the power while still smiling at us. That's what it says on his page, on his Wikipedia page. So yeah. Again, I don't quite like Keats's canonical appearance though. You know, I keep imagining him in like a black cloak, not a black cloak, a black coat, a long black coat, being bald and having a more human-like face rather than a Scottish face. But yeah, again, it is what it is. I think that I do find his canonical appearance quite funny though, because he looks very formal. You know, he's got a tie, he's got a hat. It looks very funny. Anyway, I think that brings an end to this review. So yeah, thank you all for watching, and goodbye. Hello everyone. So I've just read chapter 11 of The Last of the Jedi, not Death on Naboo. That was the last book. A Tangled Web. Getting my books mixed up. So Orion, Solus and Trevor have received the coordinates and the kind of forecasts as to where the ship is going to be headed and the schematics for the True Justice. And Orion is completely surprised as he underestimated Keats and he considers sending a thank you. And Solus says to not send him a thank you because at the end of the code there is the emergency signal, which it says they're captured. And Trevor asks what they're going to do, and Solus says that they're going to have to stick to the plan. They're going to go and save Ronan Donor. And I keep saying Donor, it's maybe Donna. I'm just going to keep on saying Donor because that's how it keeps going in my mind. Anyway, so then they start planning about. Olion just checks where the enters, and it enters the coordinates, and he says that they're close to Balasa and it shouldn't take them long, but they have a few problems. And one of the ones Trevor says is, well, they're probably looking for us. And I completely forgot about this, but yes, Orion was a spy. I forgot about that. He was a spy in Republic intelligence. And he says that, remember, I was a spy, and he says that he can change the registration number every couple of minutes. They'll eventually figure it out, but it will hopefully give them enough time. And Sora says that, okay, that's part of the plan done. Now they've just got to figure out how to... Now they just got to figure out how on earth they're going to get onto the true justice. And Solus looks at the stuff they've been sent, and she says that there's an Imperial Judicial team, an attorney, a law clerk, a judge, and they're scheduled to board at the Penumbra spaceport, and there to conduct the trial of Ronan Donor. And she says, if we went directly to the ship, we could fly right into the cargo hold. We could pose as a team and get aboard. And Olion asks, well, wouldn't the real team eventually contact the True Justice once they figure it out, once they don't get picked up? And Soros says that they would have a couple of hours, and they could free Ronan Donor and control the ship. And we learn that the ship is so new it's mostly staffed by droids. And that Ronan Donor are the only prisoners on there. And Trevor goes, yeah, a new model of security droids with the ones with dual laser cannons. And Orion says it's not going to be easy, and sort of says, I never said it was going to be easy. But she says it's their only chance. And so then they make their way over to the True Justice, posing as the team, and Trevor is very nervous because he has no idea what a law clerk is. He has no idea what a law clerk even does. But Orion just reassures him that the trick is to believe that you are what you're posing as. And Trevor goes, that's some trick. Soros guides them out, and they meet with First Officer Deacon. And Soros introduces herself and the others as she says, I am Judge Bellicon, this is Attorney Tomei Alcorn and Clerk Sam Weller. So just to clarify, Soros is Bellicon, Olion is Tomei Alcorn, and of course Trevor is Sam Weller. And the First Officer Deacon leads them to the cockpit, and they meet with Captain Tran, and he says that we thought we were going to meet you at the spaceport, and she says there was a change of plans, and that the case is so compelling and they're intending to speed it up, and Olion asks if he can go and speak with the prisoners to get, of course, that's the word. So we can prepare a case, and Dickens and Tran says, well, they're in lockdown, and Senator Solo, didn't he brief you? Because he briefed us, and he says that all prisoners are tried immediately after the the legal team arrives. And he says, I understand you're already prepared for the case. And Orion says, of course, but there's always last minute details. And of course, then he says, well, I was fully briefed by Senator Solo, I expect you were as well. And Solus interrupts and says yes. And Trans says that's protocol droids will see them to the courtroom, and Deacon will act as witnesses for and he and Deacon will act as witnesses for the official record. And they start being guided out, and Trevor asks what they'll do, and then the final line is Solus reassuring Trevor that they're going to have to do what they're supposed to and try Donor and Rome and put them on trial. That's like, honestly, the ending to this chapter was actually quite a ooh ending. And it also ended quite abruptly, because this is one of those few chapters that ends right on the last line of the page. So it looks like there should be another page, but there isn't. But yeah, the ending of this was quite interesting. It's going to be curious to see just what goes on. It's going to be interesting to see if Roan and Donor recognise Trevor. I assume Roan will. I'm not sure about Donor, but they're definitely not going to recognise Solus and Orion. You know, they're definitely not going to recognise them. But it'll be interesting to see if they recognise Trevor. I have a feeling Roan will. I'm not sure about Donor, but I think Roan will. I also enjoyed Orion in wanting to send Keats a thank you message just because he underestimated Keats. So that was, again, quite sweet, I think. What else is there? I like Trevor's nervousness. I think, again, Trevor, you know, he's clueless half the time as to what's going on. And when when Solus says it could work, and she's thinking about posing as the Jutical team, before she explains the plan, she gives Trevor a look that he does not like. It's always a look of, you ready to do this? And Trevor isn't too appealed by that look. But also him just being absolutely clueless as to what a law clerk is, and it's going to be so interesting and funny to see him completely fumble this up. I have a feeling that may just be what happens. Again, it's just going to be so funny to see him fumble it all up. But yeah. Now that's if he does fumble it up. You never know. He's Trevor. He may fumble it up. He may not. He's unpredictable. Is there anything else for me to say? Not really. Not at the moment. It definitely feels like it's going to be a race against time for this, so it's going to be interesting to see how this all unveils. But yeah. Anyway, thank you all for watching, and goodbye. Hello! I have just read chapter 12 of The Last of the Jedi, A Tangled Web. I almost said Death on Naboo again. So, well, the case has happened, and well, they're in the courtroom and it's very small, and the witness places, you know, they don't actually have chairs because they're not meant to, you know, they're not the entire I don't know the specific wording, but you know, the entire case is not meant to be seen. And Solus is familiarising herself with the controls as she's on the judge pedestal. She notices that she can activate the droids, which she thinks will come in handy. And Trevor and Olian take their place at one table, and then a attorney droid comes in, sits at the other table, and that's when Roan and Zona come in, and they begin the trial. And also, as Roan's coming in, he's surprised to see Trevor, but the officers don't see it, Dickon and Chan, and he very quickly puts his face back to being impassive. But the trial begins, and Solace asks how they plead, and the droid says guilty, and Roan is immediately opposing the droid, and saying that, oh, hold on, this droid doesn't speak for us. And the droid says that he's court appointed, and Rowan says if he's his lawyer, then he has the right to fire him. And the droid is completely baffled because it doesn't have this right in its starter banks, and sort of says that she recognises that right, and says that the attorney is fired. And again, remember, Solace is the judge. And the droid keeps going, objection! And and when Roan does say that they have the right to choose their own lawyer, the droid says that he must correct him, that the Emperor has suspended that right in the Senate when it comes to traitors of the Galactic Empire. And Roan says that he hasn't been proven yet a traitor, and the droid says that they have the right to treat him as such. And Roan says that he has the right to fire him if he is their lawyer, and he'll handle the case himself. And the droid says there is no precedent for this. I must do a more extensive search of my memory banks. And sort of says that she recognises the point of firing, and the droid goes objection, and says that it violates their procedural microchip, and sort of says that it's overruled, and Tran starts getting infuriated at the whole case because it's not going to plan. Solace is doing more traditional means rather than the more strict and imbalanced way the Empire does things. And she says to the captain that he's a witness and not a participant, and that she accepts Roan as an attorney, and asks how he pleads, and he says not guilty. And the captain says, let's get this show on a space lane, I have things to do. And Roan says that before they begin, he wants to make the motion to dismiss the case because the surveillance used was illegal. Because, as he says, under the rules of the Balarsan Senate, an order from a security court judge must be obtained. This was never done. And the droid keeps going, objection! The Emperor has suspended the need to obtain an order to run surveillance on any citizen of any world in the galaxy for any reason. And Soros goes true, but the Galactic Senate has not ratified the decision. And the droid's sensors start overheating, and he leaves for repairs. And the droid keeps saying that it hasn't been asked to consider because the Emperor doesn't need permission, and Soros says that she thinks it's a grey area, and it just overheats the droid systems, and he goes to be repaired. And the Tran says, grey area? The Empire has no grey area. That went with the Republic. And Soros says to keep quiet. And audience says that they recognise the prisoner's legal points and drop the case. And the captain says that and the captain says that it's outrageous. And this comes to the moment where I actually had to stop reading because I was laughing so much. And I'm just going to read it out to you. "This is outrageous," the captain blustered. "I am the judge," Solace said. She hit the gavel gong. "Case dismissed. Furthermore, I charge you, Captain Tran, and your first officer Dickon, with obstruction of justice and mutiny." "Mutiny?" "Mutiny, sir, for interfering with an Imperial Court case." Solace pressed the security droid button. She pointed to the stormtroopers. "Take them to lockdown." And that made me laugh so much I had to stop reading for a moment because I just found it so funny. But I couldn't focus on reading for a moment just because I found that whole sequence funny. But then Captain Tran tries to draw his pistol, but Orion's already over there, having his lock pistol, having his own blaster at his gun at his temple. And Deacon and Tran hand over their blasters and they're taken away. And Rowan says, "Thanks for the save," and then he realises, oh, you're friends with Ferus. And Solace says that they're going to have to take the ship. Rowan asks if anyone has a blaster. Orion tosses in one. And Donna asks who they are. And with all of her strength and vitality coming back, because she looks very thin and worn out earlier. And Rowan then guesses that they're friends of Ferus. And Orion says that they're good friends. And he introduces himself and Orion. And he says that they'll tell him more about Ferus later. And Rowan says that he's willing to take over a cruiser, but he wonders about their odds because they're going to have to be fighting many droids and they're only 5. And Rowan puts in that one of them is a bad shot, and I assume that's Stoner. And Sora says that they have schematics, and that's it runs light, and most of the security droids are in the holding bay or holding hold, whatever. Never mind, in the hold. And if they get to the cockpit, they can close down. They can put the holes into lockdown. And Rowan asks how many are in the hold. In the cockpit, and she says there are 3 officers and 20 droids. And Rowan says, and then she says it's not going to be a problem. And Donna or Rowan say that's not going to be a problem. And Sola says to trust her. And they go out and they meet a protocol droid who says, "Crew awaiting captain's orders." And Sola says, "The captain has been arrested. I am in charge." And the droid says, "That is a violation of authority. I'll have to summon." And Sola slices its head off with her lightsaber, and the droid just goes, "Oh dear." And then she slices its control panel as they all start to race down the hall. Rowan goes, "Oh! Well, now I get it. Ferus found his Jedi." And they get towards the cockpit and they very quickly take everyone out, take out all the droids. And Rowan and Sola says to the leading officer that what does she say? I know, because I know I'm going to miss something. She says, "You don't want to push me, do you?" And when the officer asks what she wants, she says, "I'll give them safe passage to a spaceport, and all the crew must depart, and they'll let them leave with their lives if they let them leave with the ship." And the officer very quickly agrees, saying that he's not dying for the ship. And Orion gets to the controls, and Rowan holds his blaster to the 3 officers, and as he sits down and crosses his legs, he says, "I'm going to enjoy this ride." Nice to see Trevor didn't fumble it up, because that was something I wasn't sure was going to happen. It felt like we might fumble this up. He didn't. This was actually a hilarious chapter. this is probably one of the funniest chapters, I think, in Last of the Jedi as a whole. So if you want to know what the chapter is again, chapter 12 from the Last of the Jedi Tangled Web. The whole sequence is just, the whole courtroom sequence is so funny. Again, as I was saying, as once Solace has the captain and first officer arrested, I just could not stop laughing. I had to stop. I had to put the book down for about half a minute or so just to calm myself, because I was really having a good laugh. I could not believe what was going on. And again, with Captain Tran, he's just getting angrier and angrier, and then he just everything just backfires on him. So it's a very funny chapter to me, and I think that this is probably one of the best chapters in Last of the Jedi as a whole. It's so funny. Again, like to see more Roan, and for Donor, not too sure with her at the moment. The thing is, Donna was quite a good, I guess, character in the Desperate Mission. And I guess it's somewhat... She feels a little bit underwhelming here. And I think, again, we haven't really seen a whole lot of her anyway, I think she's only spoken something like 2, maybe 3 lines of dialogue. And she didn't recognise Trevor, so I assume they haven't met. But, in a Desperate Mission, she really seemed like a proper force that could fight. And, it's just, she was like the grandmother who took no nonsense, I guess. But here she doesn't really quite seem that kind of character, especially with the line of, and one of us isn't a good shot. Which to me feels a bit contrary to what we were told in the Desperate Mission. Again, I don't remember specifically, because that was over a month ago since I read the Desperate Mission, but I'm fairly sure it was mentioned. But she was taking good care of Ferus. In there, I'm fairly sure it was mentioned she was a good shot at some point. I could be wrong on that, but it does feel maybe a little bit disappointing and underwhelming that it doesn't feel so consistent with the character in there. And that's maybe just me. Maybe it's just me. But I am hopefully we get Donna goes to being a bit more familiar to what we know her as on the Desperate Mission soon. What else would say? I'm not sure if I have anything else to say, because this chapter was absolutely hilarious. From the droids to Solace giving the Imperials the Imperials I assume the word is prosecution rather than Ronan and Donut. It was such a funny chapter. And again, I said it earlier. I just could not stop laughing the moment Solace said that she's booking them for obstruction of justice and mutiny. It was just so funny to read. It's going to be curious to see if any chapters can top this one, because again, it was just so funny. So funny. And that's one thing about The Last of the Jedi that I keep mentioning. It is so funny. There's serious stories, but they're so funny. It never feels like the humour is getting in the way of the seriousness. It is just so funny. And sometimes it really is so out there. But that's kind of the reason why it's so good, if that makes sense. So, yeah. I don't really have anything else to say on this chapter. Maybe it's disappointing we didn't get as much going with Trevor. I think that was something that maybe do feel a bit disappointing that Trevor didn't have a whole lot to do in this chapter. And it does feel like that maybe we could have had a moment between him and Orion going, what does the law clerk do? Whether it was in this chapter or the previous chapter, I feel like that would have been a nice moment, especially because I'm fairly sure, these are young readers' books, which I'm not specifically, fully aware of all the specific classifications when it comes to books, but I'm fairly sure young readers does mean targeted towards kids. But so yeah, that even then it would have probably made sense to at least have Trevor ask that to make it clear. Are the Last of the Jedi? Is it actually young readers' books? Yeah, saying young reader novels. Okay, just checked it on the Last of the Jedi wiki, not wiki, Wikipedia, on its page. So yeah, but anyway, I'm not sure if I have anything else to say about this chapter, so I guess I'll end it here. Thank you. But it's gonna be interesting to see what Ferus will do now. Now that Jonah and Rowan are rescued, and it's gonna be interesting to see how what was it? How Keats and Coven, what happens to them. But anyway, thank you all for watching, and goodbye. Come on, end. Hello everyone, I have just read chapter 13 of The Last of the Jedi, A Tangled Web. So, this is a short chapter. It's a short chapter, so I probably won't take me long to talk about it. So, Cullen and Keats are in an Imperial retaining room, and they're just thankful they haven't been sent to an Imperial detention centre. Zachary's at their table, watching a droid's gladiator contest. And Keats is thinking about challenging him and overpowering him, but he doesn't think it would be worth it because he knows there's security outside the door, and he has a suspicion as to why they might be out there. And that's when Senator Sano Sorlo comes in, and he dismisses Zachary, and Zachary says, but they're prisoners. They could be dangerous, and Sorlo says, I don't think so. And he flicks a bit of lint off his black sleeve. So Zachary leaves, and Sorlo begins trying to interrogate both Keats and Coven, and asks who hired them. And so ensues the some funny lines. Cohen says no one, and Sorlo knows immediately knows he's lying, and he says he knows that Keats was a third-rate journalist and that Cohen was a low-level senatorial aide, and Keats is furious at being referred to as a third-rate journalist. And he says, "Third-rate?" Keats veers back. "You can torture me all you want, but there's no need to call me third-rate." And Sorlo's saying if they don't talk, he'll send them to Imperial interrogators. And he asks them who hired them. And that's when Cohen says Bog Divinian. And he doesn't think he could surprise Sorlo, but he sees a flicker of doubt in his eyes, and Sorlo is in disbelief and says, "You're lying." But Cohen can see the doubt in him, and he thinks, and he knows if he can, what does it say? And it says, "Better to keep Bog and Sorlo off balance and not trust in each other." And Sorlo says he doesn't have time for lies, and that's when Zachary comes in and informs him the True Justice has been hijacked. And Sorlo's furious, saying not to tell him outside and not to say it with Keats and Cohen in the room, and Keats is relieved because he knows it's Solace back Trevor and Orion, and they've done the impossible and freed Ronan Donor. And Sordo says that the Emperor mustn't know about the true justice and that he'll deal with Keats and Curran later, and that's where we end off the chapter. Again, I don't have a whole lot to say about this chapter. Again, it's very short and there isn't a whole lot really to talk about. Keats is absolutely funny as usual, but, you know, you're probably getting tired of me saying that now. I've said it for 3 books now. But, it's I like how Sorrow, I think with Malorum, I think he would be smart enough to know outright that they were lying. Malorum would know outright that Curran was lying, but Sorrow, he has that little bit of doubt there. And it's going to be interesting to see how that develops tension between him and Bog Divinian, because he already thinks Bog a fool, but maybe there's that hint of doubt that what if Bog isn't as much of a fool as he thinks he is? And so that's going to be interesting to see how that develops. It's going to be interesting to see if he pins some blame on Bog, and in some way. Curran did very well. I was not expecting him to say Bog Divinian. I just thought they were going to refuse to talk, and Curran said no one at first, but then he actually said Bog, and that completely caught me off guard. But it was okay. And Curran didn't even think it would fool Sorrow, but he sees that flicker of doubt in him. So, yeah. I'm not sure if there's anything else I really have to say about this chapter. Not really a whole lot to say. Yeah. I don't have anything else to say really, so I'm just going to end this review here. Thank you all for watching, and goodbye. Hello, I've just read Chapter 14 of the last of the Jedi Tangled Web. So, we've finally got another chapter with Palpatine. I will say, on the main cover and the Asian market cover, Palpatine is very prominent. He's the only character on the cover. And he's hardly appeared in the story so far. He's only been in Chapter 1 and this chapter 14, was it? Chapter 14. And I think this is one of the cases where the Japanese cover is by far the best. The Japanese covers are really good, but they don't always do the best at representing the story itself. I think usually the original covers do better at representing the story, but I think this is one of those times where the Japanese cover represents the story better. But anyway, onto the topic of the chapter. We have Darth Vader and Palpatine here, and Palpatine summons Vader before the dawn, and he summons him to tell him about Sano Sordo and how he knows about the true justice, but Sano doesn't think he knows. And Sano's plan, we learn what Sano's plan is to impress Palpatine, is to it's to get Force-sensitive children into the Imperial Academy and train their reflexes and instincts and make an invincible fleet of pilots. And he says he knows how to find Force-sensitive children because of one of the former apprentices of Qui-Gon Jinn, Xanatos, and apparently he had told him about how to find Force-sensitives and midichlorians. Now, he told him many secrets of the Jedi, and he knows about, and that meant Sano knows about midichlorians. And Palpatine says, no doubt, but he thinks this will please me. Vader says, trying to keep his anger in check, he inflates his importance, and Palpatine replies, no doubt, but he thinks it will please me. He doesn't know that he is dealing with a Sith. It's quite amusing to listen to him. And Vader is just absolutely disgusted and feels enraged by the idea. Because, you know, they took out the Jedi, and this would serve as a reminder to him. He had hoped to kind of destroy his connections to the past, and having an army of Force sensitives would remind him of his past. And he's angry, saying he doesn't understand, Solo doesn't understand the Force, he can't train Force sensitives to be pilots. And Vader says, "This coming from the former pod racer?" And we learn that Palpatine will sometimes bring up Anakin's childhood to test him. Also, at the start of the chapter, he says that things are not going well in Somalia, and that he hasn't told him about it because it seemed like a minor problem, but Somalia is necessary to it's necessary for a strategic link to the rest of the Corps. Vader is just absolutely appalled at the fact that he put Bog Davinian in charge. And Palpatine said that there were reasons to keep him occupied, and Palpatine says that Solo is one of the reasons, and that Solo is useful, and that he's trying to please him. But yeah, anyway, we just went over what he was trying to do to please him, getting the Force-sensitive pilots. And Vader thinks it's a waste of time. He usually doesn't challenge his master about the fact that, about things his master says, that Palpatine says. He says, "Of course you're right. That you can't train children to only be pilots. The Force-sensitive children to be trained specifically to use the Force as for pilots, to be a pilot." And Palpatine says, "Of course you're right, but I am going to let him have this little idea for now." Vader knows better to disagree with his master, but he knows it. But he just has to object, and he just doesn't want. And we learn that he did not want other Force-connected beings to be gathered together. Order 66 had eliminated the Jedi. He thought they were gone forever. And Vader thinks it's a waste of time. And Palpatine says that if it makes him uncomfortable, he can figure out his own way to stop it. In that he and Solo are headed for a showdown, and it's Vader's job to decide when the showdown happens. And that Palpatine will not interfere. And that's when Palpatine tells him about the true justice, and that Solo thinks he's unaware of it. And Vader says, "This is another example of his poor planning. A ship can be more vulnerable than trying prisoners in a court." And Palpatine says it was an interesting idea, but that's why he's called him here, because Solo is going to try and find the ship and cover his tracks, and he can't afford to take care of a bog now, so Vader is to go to Somalia and control the situation there. And Vader leaves, and Palpatine knows he's worried, Vader. And it's because Vader doesn't want Solo getting children because it will remind him of his past, and as it says, it would serve as reminders of things he thought he needed to forget. He didn't need to forget them, he needed to glory in what he had done. He needed to scorn what he had lost. And Palpatine knows Solo won't be successful, and that he wasn't as clever as he thought he was, and that only a Sith or Jedi could find Force sensitives. But he knows Solo could stumble across a couple points to his success, and it doesn't matter. And he knows what matters is Ferus, and that will be the test for Vader. And as it says, that this would test Darth Vader most of all. So it's going to be, given the fact that, again, I haven't read Jedi Quest, but I know Anakin and Ferus were rivals in there. Again, even though I haven't read Jedi Quest, The Last of the Jedi does a very good job of giving you the necessary information. It's going to be interesting to see what Vader thinks when he comes across Ferus again. Because remember, he came across him in Underworld and he didn't do anything, but it's going to be interesting to see what his reaction here is again. Again, it's also interesting to see what Sano Solo's plan is, and it's funny to see how Palpatine sees him as such a fool. Sano does come again. Sano is... he's clever. I'll give him that. He is clever, but he's not as smart as Malorum. I think the thing is with Malorum, Malorum has a very good knack at finding things, and he was very crafty. The thing is with Sano, from what I've gathered so far about him, he's clever, but he's no Malorum. Unlike Malorum, you know, he's... I don't quite know how to specifically word it. You can just tell Malorum was by far so much smarter than Sano. And, you know, even Palpatine didn't even know some of Malorum's... some of the things Malorum knew. No, he didn't know Malorum knew certain things. Whereas Sano, where he knows quite a bit about, where he knows pretty much every move about Sano here. Malorum was definitely, I think, a bit of a smarter guy, you know. He knew Vader was Anakin, but Palpatine didn't know. Malorum knew that. So, yeah. Again, I like that we've gone a bit back. I've seen Palpatine again. The original and the Asian market covers put so much emphasis on Palpatine. You know, he is literally taking up about 80% of the cover. And at least the front cover. He's not on the back. There's only text on the back. There's hardly anything on the back, really. So it's like paint smudges. But but he's had very little appearance on here, and it definitely feels like it's not very representative of the book. Yes, Palpatine is the controlling force of the book, but and you're constantly feeling the consequence of what he had Ferus do, but he's very much not as prominent as the cover would lead you to believe. And I think that is maybe one thing about the cover, and that is a bit... you know, it's just Palpatine so far. It's only appeared in the first chapter and this chapter. And it does feel like maybe you should have had something like... do a cover maybe a bit more similar to Underworld with Ferus and Clive. And have like Palpatine... have like a shadow of Palpatine looming overhead. You know, I think that would have been a bit more representative. Because, you know, that's kind of what the Japanese cover did. It had Ferus, Solus, Trevor, Dexter on there, and then you had Palpatine above them as being like the controlling force and the shadow over the story. I think that is a very representative cover for the book. And I think maybe the normal and the Asian market ones, they are good, but I think the Japanese cover is just generally much more representative of the book itself. But anyway, which is quite surprising, because even though the Japanese covers are always absolutely stunning, they're not always the most representative of the book. So yeah. Anyway, I don't really have anything else to say really about this chapter. It's going to be interesting to see, now that we know that Palpatine knows about everything Sano Solo is trying to do and Sano doesn't know that Palpatine knows. It's going to be so funny to see him thinking he's doing certain things behind Palpatine's back, with the context that Palpatine fully well knows that. It's going to be so funny to read that. So yeah. I know the next... what does the next chapter cover? Yeah, it's back with Ferus and Clive, so yeah. That brings an end to this review, I guess. Thank you all for watching, and goodbye.